When a stray puppy locked eyes with Elon Musk on a busy Austin street, neither knew their chance encounter would spark a life-changing journey of mystery, compassion, and hope. The streets of Austin were alive with their usual chaos, cars honking, engines revving, and people rushing past each other without a second glance. Among the commotion, a tiny figure moved unnoticed. A stray puppy, no more than a few months old, weaved through the throng of legs and tires. Its coat, once golden, was now matted and dusted with grime. Its ribs peeked through, a silent testament to days, maybe weeks, without a proper meal. The puppy didn't have a plan. How could it? It was just trying to survive, following the scent of anything edible. But tonight, fate was about to change everything. Outside a modern glass building, Elon Musk stepped out of a late meeting. Dressed in a crisp shirt and jeans, he looked no different from the dozens of professionals pouring onto the street. Yet his face bore the weariness of someone juggling too many worlds: SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, and beyond. He paused briefly, glancing at his phone while his driver prepared the car. That's when the puppy appeared. Its tiny paws made no sound on the pavement, but its eyes, wide, pleading, and full of silent desperation, caught Elon's attention. It stopped a few feet away, unsure but hopeful. For a moment, Elon stared back, as if frozen by some invisible force. "Where did you come from?" he murmured, kneeling down. The puppy wagged its tail, cautiously stepping closer. It was a timid movement, as if it feared rejection. Elon noticed its scruffy appearance and the faint tremble in its legs. Most people might have walked away, convincing themselves someone else would help. But Elon inexplicably couldn't. Maybe it was the sheer vulnerability of the little creature. Maybe it was something deeper, a reminder of simpler needs in a life so overwhelmingly complicated. "All right, buddy," he said, scratching the puppy gently behind its ear. The tail wagged harder now. The driver stepped out, visibly confused. "Mr. Musk, should I—" Elon stood up, the puppy still looking up at him with those piercing eyes. "Open the door," he said after a brief pause. The driver hesitated but complied, and Elon gestured toward the back seat. The puppy didn't need a second invitation. It leapt in, curling up like it had found its safe haven. As the car pulled away, Elon leaned back, glancing at his unexpected companion. He couldn't explain why he'd acted on impulse. It wasn't in his nature to make random decisions, but something about the little creature's persistence tugged at him. But the quiet car ride was just the beginning of a story neither of them could have imagined. The car glided through the dim streets of Austin, the soft hum of the engine barely masking the puppy's occasional whimpers. Elon glanced down at his new passenger, curled tightly on the leather seat. It shivered, its tiny body overwhelmed by exhaustion and hunger. "Poor thing," Elon muttered, reaching out to gently scratch its head. The puppy's eyes fluttered open, staring at him with a mixture of trust and uncertainty. "Let's get you some food." The car stopped at a small corner store Elon had noticed earlier. His driver raised an eyebrow but said nothing as Elon stepped out with purpose. Inside, he quickly scanned the aisles for something suitable. A can of chicken broth and a pack of deli meat seemed like a good start. He added a bottle of water and headed to the cashier, who glanced at his selections with mild curiosity. "You feeding a dog or something?" the man asked, bagging the items. "Something like that," Elon replied, his tone distant but not unkind. Back in the car, the puppy perked up as the scent of food filled the space. Elon opened the can of broth, pouring some into a disposable bowl he'd grabbed, then tore the deli meat into smaller pieces. The puppy hesitated, its nose twitching as it eyed the food. Then hunger won, and it began devouring the meal with an eagerness that was both endearing and heartbreaking. As the puppy ate, Elon found himself watching with an unusual sense of calm. His life was a whirlwind of meetings, launches, deadlines, everything calculated, everything planned. Yet here he was, sitting in a car, feeding a stray dog. The absurdity of it made him chuckle softly. "Guess you're not on my calendar, huh?" he joked. The puppy didn't pause, too busy licking the bowl clean. When they reached Elon's downtown apartment, he hesitated briefly. Taking the puppy in felt like crossing some invisible line. This wasn't a pet, it was just a stray he'd helped, right? But as he opened the car door, the puppy jumped out and stood at his feet, looking up expectantly. "All right, come on," he said, shaking his head. Inside, the apartment was sleek and minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city skyline. The puppy wandered cautiously, sniffing at the unfamiliar surroundings. Elon grabbed an old blanket from a closet and spread it out on the floor. "This'll do for now," he said, patting the makeshift bed. The puppy seemed to understand, circling the spot a few times before settling down. Its eyes drooped almost immediately, the kind of deep sleep that only comes after days of running on empty. Elon watched for a moment, feeling a strange warmth. He didn't know why he cared so much. He just did. But as he turned off the lights and headed to bed, a nagging thought lingered in his mind. Where had this puppy come from? And more importantly, what had it endured to end up in his path? The next morning, sunlight poured into the apartment through the massive windows, casting a soft glow over the sleeping puppy. Elon was already awake, sipping his first coffee of the day as he reviewed emails on his tablet. His usual routine felt slightly off. Every few minutes he found himself glancing at the little bundle of fur still curled up on the blanket. When the puppy stirred, it stretched its tiny legs and let out a faint yawn before padding over to Elon. He smiled and reached down to scratch its head. "Morning, buddy. Hungry again?" As Elon prepared another simple meal, he couldn't shake the question swirling in his mind. A dog like this, young, clearly domesticated, didn't just end up on the streets without a story. And something about that story felt important. After feeding the puppy, Elon decided to act on his curiosity. He grabbed his phone and dialed the number of a friend, a local veterinarian named Dr. Helena Ortiz. She was one of the few people he trusted to handle situations discreetly. "Helena, it's Elon. I need a favor," he began, explaining the situation. She agreed to see them immediately. At the clinic, Helena greeted them with a warm smile. She crouched down to examine the puppy, who wagged its tail nervously. "What a sweetheart," she said, gently running her hands over its tiny body. "Looks like a mix, maybe part terrier. Definitely malnourished, but nothing critical." Elon felt a small wave of relief, but his questions remained. "Can you check for a microchip? Maybe someone's looking for it." Helena nodded, grabbing a scanner. When she passed it over the puppy's neck, the device emitted a sharp beep. "Well, well," she said, raising her eyebrows. "There's a chip. Let's see what we can find." She tapped at her computer, and Elon leaned forward, his curiosity growing. After a moment, Helena's expression darkened. This is strange." "What is it?" Elon asked. The chip was registered to an address on the outskirts of Austin, but the owner's contact information is flagged as inactive. It looks like the registration hasn't been updated in years. Helena turned the screen toward Elon, showing a name. Karen Morales. The address wasn't far, but something about it felt off. "I can't say for sure," Helena continued, "but this might be a case of abandonment. It happens more than you'd think." The thought made Elon's stomach tighten. Abandonment? Who could leave something so vulnerable to fend for itself? As he left the clinic with the puppy in tow, Elon found his thoughts racing. He had no obligation to dig deeper. He could let it go, chalk it up to bad luck, and focus on finding the dog a new home. But the address lingered in his mind like an itch he couldn't scratch. By the time he got back to his car, he had made up his mind. He plugged the address into the GPS and started driving. The puppy sat beside him, looking out the window as if it understood something significant was happening. When he reached the address, it was worse than he'd imagined. The house was dilapidated, its windows boarded up, and the yard overgrown with weeds. It looked like no one had lived there in years. Elon stepped out of the car, the puppy following close behind, and approached the front door. It was slightly ajar, creaking open with a gentle push. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Old furniture sat untouched, and the walls were covered in peeling wallpaper. On a small table near the entrance, Elon noticed a stack of unopened mail, some of it dating back years. He picked up an envelope and froze at the sight of a child's drawing pinned beneath it. The picture, crudely sketched in crayon, showed a little girl holding a puppy, one that looked eerily familiar. Elon didn't know it yet, but he had just stumbled into a story far darker than he'd anticipated. Elon's breath hitched as he stared at the crayon drawing. The resemblance between the puppy and the one in the picture was uncanny. A gnawing sense of urgency took hold of him as he rifled through the stack of mail. Most of it was junk, but a few pieces were addressed to Karen Morales. They painted a grim picture: overdue bills, foreclosure notices, and final warnings from utility companies. He folded one letter into his pocket and took a steadying breath. The puppy, seemingly sensing the tension, sat at his feet, its tail wagging softly as if to offer reassurance. "Let's see what else we can find," Elon muttered. He moved cautiously through the house, careful not to disturb anything. In the living room, he found a series of framed photographs, most of them covered in a layer of dust. One stood out: a young woman holding a small child, smiling brightly. Beside her, a dog that looked like an older version of the puppy sat proudly. "Karen," Elon whispered, brushing the dust off the frame. The puppy barked softly, startling him. "You recognize her, don't you?" But the rest of the house offered no more answers, only more questions. It was clear Karen and the child hadn't lived here for years. What had happened to them? And why had this puppy been left behind? Before leaving, Elon took a few more items: a photo of Karen, the child, and the dog, another unopened letter, and the drawing. Back in the car, he made a call to one of his assistants, asking them to track down any public records related to Karen Morales. While he waited for a response, he stared at the puppy, who was now curled up on the passenger seat. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" he said softly. The puppy perked up, tilting its head as if to understand. "Don't worry, we're going to figure this out." Hours later, his assistant called back. The information they provided was sobering. Karen had lost her home to foreclosure nearly 3 years ago. Public records showed no recent address, no active employment history. She and her daughter had essentially disappeared from the grid. There was no way of knowing if they were safe or even alive. Elon gripped the steering wheel tightly. He wasn't used to feeling powerless, but the weight of this mystery was beginning to settle on him. He couldn't stop thinking about Karen's smile in that photo, the innocent child, and the dog that had clearly meant so much to them. That night, he sat in his apartment with the puppy beside him, staring at the photo. What happened to them? He wondered aloud. He knew he didn't have to keep searching, this wasn't his problem. But every time he thought about walking away, those pleading eyes of the puppy reminded him why he couldn't. The next day, he made a decision. If he couldn't find Karen and her daughter, he'd ensure this puppy had the life it deserved. And maybe in doing so, he'd honor the family it once belonged to. Elon reached out to several organizations, offering donations in exchange for their help. Shelters, animal welfare groups, even missing persons advocacy organizations. Anyone who could piece together more of Karen's story. At the same time, he began preparing his own home for a new companion. The puppy, who he'd started calling Sonny, seemed to sense the change. Sonny wagged his tail eagerly as Elon set down a new bed, toys, and bowls. "You're sticking with me for now," he said, smiling for the first time in days. "Let's see where this takes us." But Elon wasn't prepared for how deeply Sonny would change, not only his home, but his heart, and the unexpected discoveries yet to come. Over the next few weeks, Sonny became an inseparable part of Elon's life. The once fragile puppy transformed into a lively, curious companion, following Elon around the apartment and even sitting by his feet during late-night work sessions. But while Sonny's new life blossomed, the mystery of Karen and her daughter still lingered. Elon's outreach efforts began to yield results. One shelter director mentioned a woman and child matching Karen, and her daughter's description had stayed there briefly a few years ago. They'd left without a trace after a few weeks, citing fear of an abusive situation. It wasn't much, but it gave Elon a sense of urgency. Whoever they were running from, he hoped they were safe. But the search wasn't the only thing occupying his mind. Sonny's presence had triggered something unexpected in Elon, a desire to give back. Not just to individuals like Karen, but to the community at large. One day, as he watched Sonny play with a toy, a thought struck him. What if he could create a program to help families keep their pets during financial hardships? Too often, people like Karen had to choose between survival and their companions. Elon got to work. Within weeks, he announced the launch of a new initiative, the Sonny Project. It provided emergency funding, veterinary care, and temporary housing for families on the brink of losing their pets. The response was overwhelming. Stories poured in from across the country, from families who could finally keep their beloved animals because of the program. The success of the Sunny project felt deeply personal to Elon. Every time he saw Sunny wag his tail, he was reminded of why he'd started this journey in the first place. But even as the program grew, he couldn't forget about Karen and her daughter. Then one day a breakthrough came. A volunteer at a domestic violence shelter in San Antonio reached out after seeing Elon's social media post about the Sunny project. She remembered a woman named Karen Morales who had stayed at their shelter years ago. Karen had left a letter with the shelter, expressing her gratitude and leaving vague instructions in case anyone ever came looking for her. Elon was stunned when the volunteer forwarded the letter. It was a heartfelt note, thanking the shelter staff for their kindness and explaining how she'd had to abandon her home and leave everything behind to protect her daughter. "If you're reading this, I'm doing my best to build a safer life for my little girl," it read. "I don't know what the future holds, but I hope one day she'll have the love and stability I couldn't give her before." Elon folded the letter carefully, his mind racing. While the shelter couldn't provide more details due to confidentiality, it was enough for him to feel some closure. Karen and her daughter had found safety, even if their exact location remained unknown. That evening, Elon sat with Sunny on the balcony of his apartment, gazing at the city lights. "We did what we could," he said softly, scratching Sunny's ears. "And maybe that's enough for now." Sunny barked in agreement, his tail wagging furiously. And though Elon couldn't rewrite Karen's story, he had written a new chapter for others, one of hope, compassion, and the power of a small act of kindness to change countless lives. As the weeks turned into months, Sunny became more than just a pet. He was a symbol of everything Elon had rediscovered: kindness, empathy, and the ripple effect of small decisions. The Sunny project continued to grow, touching lives in ways Elon hadn't anticipated. Families wrote letters, sharing how the program had reunited them with their pets or prevented the heartbreak of separation. One letter stood out. A single mother in Dallas shared how she had been on the verge of surrendering her dog Max when the Sunny project stepped in. "He's the only thing my kids and I have left from the life we used to know," she wrote. "Because of you, we didn't have to let go of the one thing that gives us hope every day." Elon read the letter aloud to Sunny, who wagged his tail as if he understood. It was moments like these that reminded him why he'd taken that first step, why he'd let a scruffy little puppy into his car that night in Austin. The story of Karen and her daughter still lingered in his mind. He didn't know where they were, or if they even remembered the puppy that had once been part of their family. But he felt certain of one thing. Wherever they were, they had tried their best to rebuild a life filled with love and resilience. Sitting on the floor of his living room one quiet evening, Elon watched Sunny chase after a ball. The room was filled with the sounds of joy, sounds he hadn't realized he missed. "You've changed more than just your own life, you know that?" he said, smiling at the little dog. Sunny barked, running back to him with the ball, his eyes gleaming with trust and happiness. Elon looked out the window, the city alive with its usual chaos. For all the noise and distractions, he'd found something meaningful in the simplest of moments: the bond between a man and a stray dog, the ripple effect of compassion, and the reminder that small acts of kindness could inspire something much greater. As the story of Sunny continued to inspire others, Elon felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He wasn't just building rockets or cars, he was building hope. And as Sunny curled up at his feet, content and loved, Elon realized that sometimes the smallest creatures can teach us the biggest lessons. If you've ever wondered how small actions can lead to big changes, this story is your answer. Share this video with someone who might need a little hope today. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of kindness and connection.